Solmes had brought a suit against the buccaneer, in which he claimed from him the sum of 350 pounds. Irene still met Bosini. Solmes was certain. Where or how, he neither knew nor asked. One day Solmes entered her room, though she did not lock her doors till bedtime.
"What do you want?" she said. "Please leave my room." He answered, "I want to know how long this state of things between us is to last. I have put up with it long enough. Will you please leave my room? Will you treat me as your husband? No. Then I shall take steps to make you. Do."
One day, in the middle of dinner, Mrs. Macandrew said, "Oh, and whom do you think I passed today in Richmond Park? You'll never guess. Mrs. Solmes and Mr. Bosini. They must have been down to look at the house."
Then her charming face grew eager, and glancing round with almost a lover's jealousy, young Jolyon saw Bosini striding across the grass. Curiously, he watched the meeting, the look in their eyes, the long clasp of their hands. They sat down close together, linked for all their outward discretion. With characteristic decision, old Julian came at once to the point. "I've been altering my arrangements, Joe," he said. "You can cut your coat a bit longer in the future. I'm settling 1,000 a year on you at once. June will have 50,000 at my death, and you the rest. That dog of yours is spoiling the garden. I shouldn't keep a dog if I were you." The morning after a certain night on which Solmes at last asserted his rights and acted like a man, he breakfasted alone. 2 nights before, at Winifred Darty's, he had taken Mrs. Macandrew into dinner. She had said to him, looking in his face with her sharp greenish eyes, "And so your wife is a friend of that Mrs. Bosini's." Not deigning to ask what she meant, he had brooded over her words. They had roused in him a fierce jealousy, which, with the peculiar perversion of this instinct, had turned to fiercer desire. "My client, Mr. Solmes Forsyte, is a gentleman, a man of property, that, as a matter of principle, he has felt himself compelled to bring this action." The name Philip Bairns Bosini was called 3 times by the ushers, and the sound of the calling echoed with strange melancholy throughout the court and galleries. "In my judgment, the plaintiff is entitled to recover this sum from the defendant." The maid Bilson was in the hall, and in answer to his question, "Where is your mistress?" told him that Mrs. Forsyte had left the house about noon. "What message did she leave?" "Mrs. Forsyte left no message, sir." He stooped over the drawer where she kept her jewels. He opened it. Divided in little green velvet compartments were all the things he had given her, and stuck into the recess that contained the watch was a 3-cornered note addressed "Solmes Forsyte" in Irene's handwriting. "I think I have taken nothing that you or your people have given me," and that was all. In that moment of emotion, he betrayed the Forsyte in him, forgot himself, his interests. His property was capable of almost anything, was lifted into the pure ether of the selfless and unpractical. June had waited for her chance, and when her chance came, she took it in the gallery of Court 13. Bosini's absence did not disquiet her. She took a cab to his rooms. She let herself in and left the door open. Saw Irene in the open doorway. "You have no right here," she cried defiantly. Irene answered, "I have no right anywhere." "What do you mean?" "I have left Solmes." Old Jolyon returned from Wisteria Avenue. He had made up his mind to tell her that he was reconciled with her father. He would no longer live alone in this great house. He was going to give it up and take one in the country for his son. She did not see any difficulty. If you can't buy the house, you will pay his lawsuit claim. He knew that he could not refuse her. Young Bosini has been run over in the fog and killed. Concerning the cause of this death, his family would doubtless reject with vigour the suspicion of suicide, which was so compromising. They would take it as an accident, a stroke of fate.
One night, in his frustration, Solmes rapes his wife, Irene. She flees at Bosini's, her lover, who decides to confront Soames.
George stared at him. He'd never liked Soames. He now held him responsible for Bassini's death. Soames had done for him by that act of property that had sent the buccaneer to run amok that fatal afternoon. The poor fellow, he was thinking, was so cracked with jealousy, so cracked for his vengeance, that he heard nothing of the omnibus in that infernal fog. She had come back then of her own accord to the cage she had pined to be free of, and taking in all the tremendous significance of this, he longed to cry, "Take your hated body that I love out of my house. Take that pitiful white face, so cruel and soft, before I crush it. Get out of my sight. Never let me see you again." Then he cried, contradicting what he had not yet spoken, "Stay there!" And turning away from her, he sat down in his accustomed chair on the other side of the hearth.